All right, folks, welcome to another quick tutorial. This time we're going to cover the UV unwraps for the items inside of our textbook, 3ds Max Basics for Modeling Video Game Assets, Volume 1. Um, in order to follow this video, you will have to have had finished Chapter 3 in Modeling the Curtain Wall. Again, you'll need the textbook to be able to do that. So UV unwrapping can be a little bit tricky, especially for beginners, but it's a necessary evil. It's important to know how to do the UVs of a model in order to be able to apply textures properly. So the best way I like to explain this is here. I've got a cube here, or rather, I will have a cube here in just a moment. It's like a transforming cube. I'm just going to put it into cube form again. Okay, so I've got a cube here. Okay, and the cube has this funky pattern on every single side of it, right? But if we pretend like our camera was a projector, I hold the cube like this, what can you see? How many sides of my cube can you see? You can only see one side of my cube. So essentially, when we're texturing items, or at least a decent way to think about it, is as if you were projecting a texture onto a 3D asset. However, when your 3D asset is a cube like this and you can only project to one side, then the rest of the sides won't get any texture. So what we need to do in order to texture a 3D object is to flatten out this cube so that all sides of the cube are facing the direction of the projector. Okay. So if I extend the analogy further, here's 3ds Max. And let's start by creating a cube here. So I'll just make a cube, and I'll just make this a 1 meter by 1 meter cube. Okay, and we'll center this out. Okay. All right, so I've got a cube. Okay. And my edge faces are on, so you can see all the edges. So my cube is a standard 6-sided cube. All right. Now I'm going to right click and convert this to an editable poly, and we're going to end up into our modify tab here. And inside of our modify tab, we'll have our modify list. Now this is super important to make sure that you've got your cube, the editable poly section of your cube selected, not like you don't want to have element or anything like that. Just make sure that you've got the only selection you've got is the editable poly selection here in your modify list. And then we're going to open up the UVW or the UV unwrap modifier. So in our modifier list, we can just search for UV and you will come across this unwrap UVW. There's lots of other ways to unwrap, but the basic one that we're going to cover here right now will be the unwrap UVW. Okay. So now that I've applied this modifier, the cube now is inside this UV unwrap. Now, if you're 3D modeling an object, this is the last step you will do. You can't make UVs and then go back and make an adjustment to your model. So keep that in mind. Okay. Now, I can select each one of these sides of this cube, and I can go ahead and manipulate and pull them apart in order to flatten them out. So in reality, there is no such thing as 3 dimensions for game design. It's an illusion. So this cube is not a 3-dimensional cube as much as it is a collection of 6 2D planes stacked together on 3 dimensions, which means I need to get these 6 planes flattened out so that I can project a texture onto all the sides. Okay, so with the UV wrap unwrap modifier applied, we got a completely different set of tools here. A lot of these tools are very, very useful, slightly more advanced. We'll go over some of them today. But for now, what I want to do is I'm going to move my model over to the side here. The first thing I'm going to do is open up the UV editor. Upon opening up the UV editor, we get an entirely different display, right? And inside of here, what you can see is a checkerboard pattern here. Okay, and then there's an object that seems to be selectable on the inside. Well, if we look carefully, when I deselect, it's not selected now, but if I select this, if you look at my cube, you'll notice that it's selected this one face here. All right, so I'll show you that again when I click. Oops. Oh, it seems to be, it's not going to work because it's going to be different sides of the cube. So it'll probably be that side now, because all the sides of my cube are actually stacked on top of each other. So I can demonstrate this by simply pulling this apart. Okay, so you can see here, I've got 6 separate squares. Okay, and each one of these squares represents a different side of this cube. Now, 3ds Max has cut these apart for us. Perhaps we would like these UVs to be one unified UV, and we can absolutely do that. So first, let's just explore a couple of things that are going on here. A real common question is, what does the UV stand for in the UV wrapping? Well, the best answer I have for you is I was always told that whenever we are working in 3 dimensions, we are following an XYZ coordinates, and these are the UV coordinates. Okay, so it's a 2-dimensional plane as opposed to a 3-dimensional plane, and this point here is the 0, 0 of this plane, which means if I were to go 1 square over, it would be the -1, 0. If I were to go 1 square down, it would be the -1, -1. And if I were to be over here and go this way, it'd be the +1, +0. Well, I guess just 0. And if I were to go up, it'd be +1, +1. And it goes on and on and on into infinity. Okay? But our texture map will only fit into this square. It only just gets repeated with every other UV coordinate. Okay? So we need to get all of our asset inside of this square. So one thing we can do now is if we wanted this cube to be a unified single UV plane, we could go here to our edge select, which is also still just 2 on our keyboard for shortcut. And we can select any one of these edges. And when we do, what we'll notice is one of the other edges will become blue. That edge is a shared edge. So if we look at our cube here on the 3D, we'll see that this edge is what got highlighted, which means these 2 faces sharing that edge. Okay, now if we wanted that edge to be connected or remain connected in our UV, we could go over here and stitch the 2 sides together. So if we stitch, they have now become stitched. They're now a single object. And we can continue on if we wanted to. We could click this edge, and you can see it shares this edge. We can stitch that together. We can grab this edge, stitch, this edge, stitch, and then we can go ahead and grab this edge and stitch that as well. Okay, so now we've got a unified UV. So it's, as you can clearly see, it's just a cube that has been essentially unwrapped or flattened out. Very, very, very similar to like pre-cutting the paper for wrapping paper before you put it on the package. Okay, but now we've got to stick it inside of our 0, 0 coordinate of our UV. One way we can do that is we can just select the entire element here. We'll just grab the whole thing, and we can grab, we can just click on this pack custom, and it'll just throw it right inside there. Okay. Now to demonstrate what this is doing, if I go up here into this drop down, I can go ahead and do the texture checker. And when I do that, you'll see here that we've got this A1, A2, and then B, C, and D1 all the way to D8 positions here that shows our UV on it. And if we look at our 3D model, we'll see exactly how that texture is being projected onto our object. So you can take note of the orientation of the shapes of the triangles, of the letters, so you'll know which way things are facing. And this would be an adequate UV for a cube. I mean, there's a fair amount of wasted space. In normal practice, we would try to use up as much of this space as possible. But for the sake of a cube, this is pretty much as good as it's going to get. Okay. The only other option really would be if there was going to be all 6 sides of your cube was going to be sharing the exact same texture. You can then separate each one of these pieces of the cube, which would be a simple matter of just doing the same thing in reverse. So you can select a seam that you don't want, but instead of stitching, we're going to break. And then once you've broken it, you can start pulling it apart. And then you could, in theory, if the cube is going to share the exact same texture on all 6 sides, we could just make this the same size as the entire UV and put all 6 sides on top of each other to share the same projection, which would be perfectly fine. Okay? So that's in a nutshell how UVs work and why we do them. Now, let's close this and let's open our curtain wall. Okay, so we need to unwrap this curtain wall in order for us to be able to adequately texture it. Now, the first thing you're going to need is the textures that come with the textbook. So if you own the textbook, you'll already have access to these textures, and I don't need to share them to you here. With that, I am going to go to the material editor up here. Okay, so if I click on the material editor, and we'll get an open material editor here. Okay, now the material is essentially the piece that calculates the texture map. So we put all the textures together in a material, and then we project that material onto our asset. So I'm just going to apply a physical material here. And then from the base color, I am just going to go looking for a general bitmap. Okay. This is very basic texturing that we're going to do here. And then from there, I'm going to go locate my textures, which should probably be in a shared folder with 3ds Max, by the way, in case you ever wanted to share the file with someone. But for my purposes here, I'll just do this. We're looking for the curtain wall, which is my second texture here. Okay. And we'll open that up. Okay, and we'll see that that bitmap is connected to our base color there. And I can select the rectangle that was the original model for our curtain wall. And I can click on this button here where it says assign material to selection. So when I click it, it'll assign the material to my selection. Now, if we look carefully, we can see this is a hot disaster. It doesn't really look like anything, right? And that's because the UVs are, well, are hot disaster. Okay. So with the edible poly selected, we're going to go into our modifier and we're going to search for the unwrap UVW. Okay. And now that we've applied that, we can see here that Max has attempted to do the UVs for us, and they are still a hot mess, right? And you can tell that by the fact that the texture is just absolutely wild and just all over the place. Okay. But that's not a problem because we're going to fix those UVs right now. So we'll start with opening up the UV editor, and I will bring this over so it's visible to everybody. Okay, and if we zoom out here, we'll see what 3ds Max has attempted to do here. So if I grab this now, and if we look carefully on our asset over here, as I move this around, you should notice the textures start to move around behind it, right? And even if I put this properly inside of the UV map, it still looks absolutely terrible. And that's because we need to set all of our normal faces in the right direction in order to project our texture onto it. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to have my face selection on. So it's still 3, just like inside of Max. So 3 on your keyboard, or you can click here, the polygon select. Now I could select each face individually if I wanted to, or I could hold Control and select along all the faces that I want to use. Okay. But I'm going to use this select by planar angle. So it's going to select all of the faces that share the exact same angle. Okay. before we even do that, though, what we need to do is kind of look at our model carefully and decide where we're going to seam this thing and how it's going to work. And the way we're going to do this is by deciding on what parts of our curtain wall need what texture, right? So the front face here is clearly going to use this brick type texture. So we're going to need all of these front flat faces. So with the select by planar angle turned on, I'm going to select this planar angle. Okay. So you'll see I've got all of those faces selected, and I'm going to hold control, and I'm also going to select all of these faces, okay, because they're all going to share the same texture from that angle. And if we look at our UV editor, you'll see we've got some weird selection there that doesn't really make a lot of sense. And that's because we need to adjust the normal mapping. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up here in our UV editor mapping, and we're going to select normal mapping. Okay. Now there's a couple of different mappings here. We've got front, back and front mapping, left, right mapping, top, bottom mapping, and then there's a couple of there's box mapping and no box mapping, but we're not going to deal with those right now. We're going to deal with these top three. Okay. So this texture is clearly not a top, and it could be a front back, but it's actually the left right. Just based on the way that I modeled it, it's going to be the left right sides. So I'll click OK, and then you'll see here I can pull this out that I've now got the UV of what it looks exactly like the selection that I've got. Right. So if we fast forward a little bit, we can go around to the backside, and we can essentially, with the planar selection still on, we can select that there. Okay, and then again, it'll be the exact same normal map, and it'll be the left right again for me. So I'll click OK, and then I can pull this aside like this. Okay, we can use all of this space to work, but the objective is going to be to get all of the textures inside of this square here. Okay, so now I'm going to select planar on this side. Okay, but I'm going to turn off the select by planar angle, and I'm going to hold Alt for deselect, and I'm going to do a marquee selection here to remove the Merlons here, because I just want the flat piece. And then once again, I'm going to go mapping, normal mapping, and it's not going to be left right anymore. Now it will be the back front. Okay, and it's kind of sideways. So there's some rotation buttons here I can press. So I'm just going to rotate it once so that it's the right direction up. Right, because the texture is going to have a right side up, so we're going to need this to be right side up. So again, wash, rinse, repeat. We're going to do the same thing to the other side. Okay, so I'm going to turn on the planar mapping, angle mapping selector thing again. Turn it off. I'll hold Alt and I'll marquee select to deselect the Merlons, and we'll go mapping, normal mapping, and again it'll be front back for me here. And you'll see here it's also rotated, so we'll rotate it again. Again, feel free to use all the space you want to use. Okay, so now we've got the fronts, the sides, and we can do the tops now. So we can turn on that planar selection again, and we can select this here. So this will be left, right again. So just normal mapping, and this will be the left, right. Click OK. Cool. And backside, same thing. Select. Mapping, normal mapping, left, right, okay. All good. We can select this floor. This will definitely be normal mapping top down. Top bottom, rather. All right. And then we are going to select the sides of our Merlons. So with the planar select by planar angle on, if I select this, it selects all of that, right? But it's still got a little bit of use for us still. So I'm just going to angle this here, and I'm going to hold control and select all of these inside angles. Okay. And I'm going to hold control and select all of these side and side angles. All right. And then I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to hold control to manually select those faces that we did not select on the original selection. Okay, so this will be mapping, normal mapping. This will be the back front for me. Again, this might differ for you. It depends. Okay, and now we'll rotate this around. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. I'll just get an angle where I can make all my selections. And again, we will select, control, select. Okay, and then I'll turn that off and control select these 4 faces. And once again, we are going to normal map, same direction. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stack these guys. I'm just going to group select and just stack them perfectly on top of each other. Because essentially, once we get the texture on here, they're going to share the exact same texture. So this will allow them to all look exactly the same. In fact, we could probably go as far as to like even stack that just like that there, and then they take up even less space. Okay. I believe now if we want to, we can just marquee select the remaining pieces. Okay. We can select the remaining pieces. We can have a look at what those pieces are, right? And this time we're going to go to mapping and flatten map. Okay, we're going to leave our polygon at angle threshold to 45 and click OK. And now we'll see here we've got all of the rest of these pieces. Okay. Now this is going to be a little bit of work. We're going to probably need to like re-plan and organize these a little bit. But for now, they can just find their way over there. Okay. But now, if we want to take a look at what the texture looks like here, we've created the material already a second ago. So if we go into this drop down earlier, when I showed you guys the texture UV checker, where we can see how the UVs look inside of this checker pattern, we can also use our material that we made to put in this place so we can actually visually see how this texture is going to look like. So if you check this out here, I've got map 0 curtain wall texture that I created earlier, and there's that texture. Okay. So now we can literally just like, we can grab that front curtain wall. So let's go to the element select here. So when I select, I'll select the whole thing, the entire map, right? And like I said, we know this, we want this to be all brick. So we can go ahead and while holding, we can go to our scale selection specifically if you want, and we can scale this down. Okay. And then of course W, E, and R still work here for shortcuts. We can scale this down. All right. And we can now you're going to want to be careful when you do things this way, because the scale of your texture, like if you pay attention for a sec, I'll make this really big and I'll show you what it looks like over here. You see the size of the brick here is smaller. When this gets bigger, the texture gets smaller. Okay. And if I make it really, really small, you'll see that the brick gets really, really big. Okay. So when you're scaling things around and texturing in this manner, you're going to want to watch out that like the scale of your textures don't get too out of whack. In other words, this side of the curtain wall, the bricks might look bigger than the other side or what have you, right? So it might actually be wise to return this back to where they were when they started, like so, and include all of these pieces here. Okay. And then we can pack it. And then when we pack it, we end up with them all being at the same size. Then we can go ahead and get the texture pack the way we want it. Okay. I actually think I need them just to be just a touch smaller. I will scale it down just a hair more. Okay. Because the bigger UV here is this part. I'll just group select and I'll scale this down just a touch more. Just because I want to maintain the scale across all of my texture. There we go. I now have brick across all of that. So I'll grab the back side and I'll stack it right on top. Okay. And now I can be confident that my textures will be all the same size. And I'm just going to center these because I also want the wrap is what we would call it of my brick texture to be continuous, right? So if we look here, I'm trying to get this so that the brick texture here is even. See what I'm trying to do? So actually, I'll just move this over a bunch. Okay, then I can just do like that. You see, I've got my brick lines kind of sort of lined up now. I'll grab this one and I'll bring it over. And I can do the same thing over here. I can just check, make sure that the texture lines are kind of looking decent. To be frank, a lot of texturing takes place inside of programs like Substance Painter these days. But this is still an effective like placeholder way to texture your models. So there's really nothing inherently wrong with it. You can see here we've got this pyramid shaped brick that just seems to suit this just perfectly. So we can bring this over and we can scale this down and we can slide it into place. And it's okay if they're all stacked. It's all about the projection angle, right? Now if we look here, all of our Merlons have the same texture on the sides. And then if we want these pieces, so this is the inside wall here, to have brick, we can just go and throw it down here. Like it's perfectly fine to overlap them. And then this will be that inside, right? So we can come down. Again, I can overlap them on this texture all I want. We would not do overlapping UVs like this. Later on, when I demonstrate how to do Substance Painter, the UVs would all have to be separate, but that's okay. For this purpose, it's perfectly fine. We can select this piece now, which is the floor, and it can sit right here and have like this grainy texture if you like. Maybe it would be better if it was here even, because it's got the same brick pattern in an alternate direction. So it's as you wish, to be completely frank. And then we got one more piece, which is this. So we can grab all of this, click this little grouping button here, and then scale this down. Because these pieces aren't really prominent, so it's fine. They can just all sit like that. Okay, and then if we have a quick look at our curtain wall, there it is, all textured with everything looking decent. Okay, so that's a quick tutorial on doing UVs. Of course, this texture isn't really amazing or anything. You can also see it gets shiny at spots there. Like you can really see the light shining here. There's more detail we could totally add to this material, but right now it's not really the objective that we're going to go for. But anyways, this is all I expect. This is based on our textbook, once again, the 3ds Max Basics for Modeling Video Game Assets, Volume 1. And that's how to UV the curtain wall. And if you've done your table and chair assignment from the Chapter 3, you can use this method to UV your table and chair. All right, so thank you so much for watching, and stick around for more videos.